Please welcome rookie duo Marta Prazanowska and Dmytro Pohorielov. Today, they will be showcasing premiering content in their session on warehouse-specific inventory transactions. Please stick around after Marta and Dmytro's session for a live Q&A.
Welcome to the session. It's my pleasure to present warehouse-specific inventory transactions. Thanks DynamicsCon for this opportunity to present. And a reminder from the beginning, there is a live Q&A, so please ask questions as we go through the presentation. My name is Dmytro Pohorielov. I am a software engineer at Microsoft. I work in supply chain management warehouse team. And it's a pleasure to present together with Marta.
Hi, my name is Marta Prazanowska. I'm a software engineer at Microsoft, born and raised in Poland, currently living in Denmark. Together with Dmytro and Tim, we worked really hard on this new feature, so we are excited to tell you more about it.
The agenda for today's presentation is following. At first, we will start describing how existing solution works. We will talk about inventory transactions, and we will explain the problems we face with inventory transactions in the warehouse operations. That will kind of lead us towards the introduction of the new feature, new solution, which we are presenting here. Then we will make a demo of the feature. We will talk about the performance of the feature, and we will end up by discussing breaking changes and the release schedule.
Inventory transactions are abstraction over any inventory changes. We need to know if there is some inventory added or removed, and we need to keep track of it all the time. This is needed to process reservation, manage on-hand quantities, or calculate inventory values. To get more context about inventory transactions, we need to check another table. It's InventTrans origin. This table is a common abstraction over the originator, so let's say source of the inventory changes. There could be many different types of originators. The most popular ones are sales order, production, purchase, inventory counting, and many, many more. What's important in the context of warehouse, this could be also warehouse work and warehouse container. Now, after this small reminder, let's go through a very quick and trivial example of sales order. So let's imagine we have sales order for 2 headphones. How would this look like in our system? First, when order is placed, there is new inventory transaction data created. And what's important to notice here, it's the sales order reference category. This is a sales order related inventory transaction. Assuming we want to get these headphones to a client, we of course need to get them out of the warehouse. So it's a time for warehouse work. Work starts with picking 2 items, and this produces 2 inventory transactions for reference category work. When the items are picked, we need to, of course, put them away to the final location, which is bay door. And this step produces 2 more inventory transactions. It's pretty simple example and easy to understand, I hope. But what would happen if these headphones were serial tracked items? What if each piece had a different serial number? This case would look like this. So we have 4 more inventory transactions, and adding 1 more serial number produces 4 more inventory transactions. Imagine we had 100 more headphones. It would be 400 more transactions, and I haven't even thought about using staging, which would increase it even more. I think you can already see where this is going. Inventory transactions are not optimized for tracking dimensions. Inventory transactions were created with statuses and updates in mind. Usually, inventory transactions like the one here for sales order, depicted on this diagram, it goes through in its life through multiple statuses, multiple states. and it follows defined sequence. In all of these steps, it goes through processing at different statuses and also is validated in financial context. It's a really good system to support financial changes. And I think we can agree when it comes to finances, everything should be clear, validated, compliant. This is a nice system, but when we focus on warehouse part only, it becomes a little bit too sophisticated, too complex, because inventory transactions are not optimized for warehouse processes. This and the fact they are not great with tracking dimensions gave us the opportunity to come up with something new. Here we are, happy to introduce new warehouse-specific transactions. What is so different, original about warehouse transactions? They represent operation over a set of items. So no more transactions for each separate serial number. They are insert only, event style, there are no updates. They don't have financial information, less fields, which also means less validations, less processing. Also less database indexes, so less space taken by database. They use sequential GUIDs, no number sequences, which reduces database round trips. They use efficient validation mechanisms, because with them we can do validation over a set of items. This reduces drastically the count of validations. Also, they use the normalized inventory dimensions and transaction originator to keep the data that we need very close. How did we achieve it? Two core components of this new solution are these two new tables, WHS inventory transaction and WHS inventory item set element. The first one describes transaction, so the change that is performed in the warehouse. It holds the information about the cost. We can see it as reference category. It could be work or container. It also tells us about the location where the change occurred. And also we have this type, transactions have types. Here we can see issue and receipt transaction. The second table, WHS inventory item set element, describes inventory that is object of the transaction. It tells us the item, the quantity, and the dimension that are product and tracking dimensions. And this split between storage dimensions and product and tracking dimensions is actually seems pretty natural. Because if you think about 3 red t-shirts size M, it doesn't matter where it is located. If it's on some shelf, floor, it's still the same 3 red t-shirts size M. So this information, once collected, can be reused, and set can be reused by different transactions. Here on the left side, you can also see what are the possible types of transactions. We only have 4 types. It's physical reservation, removed physical reservation, registered issue, and registered receipt. I will tell a little bit more about reservation in a couple of moments. So let's see how these new elements fit into the bigger picture. If we come back to this example of selling 2 headphones, how would it look with new transactions? Beginning would be exactly the same. It's important to realize that inventory transactions for sales order and any other source documents, they work exactly the same as they were before. We have these entries in InventTrans, in InventTrans origin. Change starts when we reach warehouse. So here we have new transactions, new WHS inventory transactions for work, and new entries in WHS inventory item set element. These are these 2 headphones, and we have both serial numbers. And maybe what you can notice here that both of them, this step is reused by 2 transactions, by the issue and by the receipt. Warehouse transactions are inserts only. So we needed to somehow manage reservations in a new way. This is where reservation transaction comes in handy. Whenever we need to reserve some inventory, this transaction entered in the system guarantees that it's reserved. When we want to start the work and take this inventory further, we need to remove the reservation. And we do that by inserting new transaction of type removed reservation. Now we're free to move the items. Here, the issue and receipt. And the next step depends on what we are doing. If the work is finished, that will be basically the end. But if we need to continue moving it, you would need to put another reservation transaction. And this cycle of reservation, removed reservation, issue and receipt could be repeated multiple times depending on what we're doing. So I said that item set can be reused. And how this works? Whenever worker user picks inventory, it starts with initial picks. This is the moment when we really know what is going to be picked. This is the moment when serial numbers or any other tracking dimensions are recorded. And this information we collect to build an item set. Now, doesn't matter if you go straight to bay door or through the staging area to the bay door, this item set can be reused. It doesn't need to be recreated on next steps. It really saves validation, time, and space. Here I want to tell you a little bit more about differences in existing and new model. In the upper area of the screen, the pink one, you can see the existing tables, and the lower green, it's the new model. Between them, there is the WHS work InventTrans table, and this one gained new fields. It's inventory transaction origin ID, and it is needed to build relation with new transactions. Before I continue, it's very important to remember the changes we did were of performance nature. So functionality doesn't really change. This also means that data that we use is more or less the same. It's just organized differently. So, for example, to know what caused the transaction, we were looking at reference category and reference ID. Now we look at the fields named the same, but they are just on WHS inventory transaction now. To figure out what was the nature of a change, we were investigating status issue and status receipt on InventTrans table. Now we check the type of the WHS inventory transaction to understand what the change really was. To know what was being object of the transaction, we are looking at item and quantity defined on InventTrans. Now the inventory information is stored in the WHS inventory item set elements table. And last but not least, the inventory dimensions, previously stored as identifier on InventTrans. Now it's denormalized and split, so the storage dimensions exist on inventory transaction and product and tracking dimensions exist on inventory item set element. I've said already a couple of times probably that transactions are inserts only. And some of you maybe already wondered that size of this table could grow really fast, but we are prepared for that. Because whenever work is completed, the transactions are being marked to be archived. Then the batch job picks them up and moves to a different table. This different table is a new SQL Server table that has no joins and it's been denormalized. So this way, the archive transactions are optimized for reads and querying. The active transactions are optimized for inserts, the archive for the reads. The batch job by default runs every 10 minutes, but it could be configurable Also, don't worry about archive transactions. They are not lost. They are still available to be seen in the UI, and they are taken into consideration whenever they needed be, like for on-hand consistency checks. Okay, so next question would be probably, if we archive so much, will the archival table grow too fast? We're ready for that too. Relatively new feature is the archival cleanup. It's another bad job that will be fired by default once a day, but it's configurable again. You could turn it off or do it even more often. Its role is to reduce the size of the archive table. For now, it works for reservation-related transactions because it actually makes sense. If you think about it, it seems like a log. When the work is completed, all the information simply not needed to calculate it. We are also considering in the future maybe to do even more aggressive archival. So how are the changes visible in UI? Actually, there are not that many changes. The first one that comes into mind is the inventory transactions form. This form will no longer show work-related inventory transactions. So to see them, we would need to access new form, warehouse transactions. It's the one below on the screen. And this form will show all transactions that are important for warehouse processing. So this will include inventory transactions, as before, and also the new one, the work-specific transactions. Here they are marked by the orange rectangle. How to try these new things? Configuration, fortunately, isn't very complex. We would need to enable warehouse-specific inventory transactions feature, and then do the configuration on warehouse management parameters form. This form visible here on the left side, it has new section, warehouse inventory transaction mechanism. And here we need to specify where do we want to use new transactions. Then based on this configuration, new field, inventory transaction mechanism, gets populated on work table or container table, and it specifies what type of transactions are used. What's important to note is this mechanism cannot be changed for already created work or container. It will only be applicable for new entities. This would be time for the demo. Thank you.
So it's a pleasure for me to present this feature, to demo this feature in the system. And as with any feature in FNO, first you need to activate it in feature management. To do that, I open feature management workspace, and I find the warehouse specific inventory transactions feature. Please note that it is prefixed with a preview. That's because the feature is in public preview as of now. Once the feature is activated in feature management, I can go to the warehouse management parameters form and configure, as Marta explained. I can enable certain warehouse scenarios to use the warehouse specific inventory transactions. So let's do that. So as you can see, two new tabs appeared on the warehouse management parameters form. Let's open warehouse inventory transaction mechanism. And for sake of this demo, we will play with a sales picking scenario. Let's activate the sales order warehouse scenario to use the warehouse inventory transactions like that. Now for this demo, I have created an item called headphones. It is a serialized item, and there are just two pieces of serial 1, serial 2 on it. And I have also created a sales order exactly for two pieces. So what we will do now, we will now release that sales order to the warehouse, and we will see the transactions which are being generated. So here is a sales order. Let's release it to the warehouse. Once it succeeds, we should get a work created. Yes, work is generated. And actually already at this point, even before we start executing this work, it's worth looking at the transactions. So let's look at all the transactions related to headphones. So notice if I click transactions and I see all the inventory transactions for this item, we don't see anything related to the warehouse work. To see the transactions related to warehouse work, including the sales transactions as well, This is a new form which Marta talked about, the warehouse transactions form. And this form pretty much has very similar capabilities as the existing inventory transactions form, but it just shows all the types of transactions. So here I can click display dimensions. I can show the dimensions I'm interested in. I can save the setup. And here is my work-related transaction. This is a reservation. So right now, let's try to execute this work. I'm opening Warehouse mobile app emulator. Let's go to outbound, sales picking. I will use the work ID of the work which we have just created. At this stage, it's actually worth noting that actually nothing changes from the WMA perspective. So your warehouse workers, they will notice no differences. The only difference they will notice is that system performs faster. I'm picking an LP with 2 items and putting out 2 bay door. Good, so work is executed. Let's now take a look at the transactions. First to notice, you see this new type of the transactions. As we described, we don't modify the transactions, but we rather create a compensating transaction which kind of removes the reservation. And here you can see it in reality. Important to notice about this form, it shows you a flat list, right? So you don't see a concept of item set on this form, but it is just because we tried to give you the same experience as you had on inventory transactions form. So we kind of join the 2 tables, WHS inventory transaction and WHS item set element, right? So you get a flat list with a very similar user experience. Now I can show you the archival. Normally, archival is executed automatically as a part of the batch job every 10 minutes, but for sake of this demo, I'll just call it directly. It's completed. And if I now open all the transactions and press the refresh, notice that nothing changed. And that's by design, because data is moved from the active transaction storage to the archived storage, which is optimized for reads. But majority of all processes in the system kind of don't, for them, this change is invisible. It's abstracted away. So warehouse transactions form, tracing forms, consistency checks, and so forth, they're able to read from the 2 sources, and we have done that uptake for you. Now let's try to clean up those transactions, because as you can see, there are plenty of transactions here related to reservations. And the idea is that once work is executed, normally you don't care so much about the reservations, which anyway result in 0. So you reserve 2 and then you removed reservation of 2. That's where cleanup of archived transactions comes into play. And again, normally it's executed once per day automatically. You can configure that. I will show that. But like for sake of this demo, I'll just call it directly. As you can see, all reservation transactions are gone. So basically, now we are in the state where we have only physical updates. Let me now show you where you can configure some of those cleanup and archival related parameters. So for example, to control cleanup, on the warehouse management parameters form, you go to warehouse specific inventory transactions archival section. And here you can say, are you interested at all to clean up them? Yes, no. By default, it is yes. And you can say, for how long do you want to keep the reservation related transactions? 0 means you want to delete them basically right away. So you can change those parameters depending on your scenario. Cleanup and archival, it is executed as part of process automation. So here in the background processes, one can find 2 new jobs. Archive warehouse inventory transactions, and by default it's every 10 minutes. And there is another one, clean up archived warehouse inventory transactions. It runs daily, but you can change that. Also, I would like to show you how you can see the work transactions from the work. As you can see, pick and put is executed. I click transactions just as before, nothing changed here, but here there is a small change. You don't see any more from and to transactions, but rather you have a new field, clickable, number of warehouse transactions. You can click on it or you can use a button. It does the same. So you can see the transactions which are related to the specific work line. That concludes my demo. Thank you. Let's discuss the performance characteristics of this new feature. We show you right now the two scenarios, the sales picking and movement of full license plates. And you see two charts. The left chart talks about execution time, and the right chart talks about number of SQL batch requests. So execution time, I think, does not require explanation, but number of SQL batch requests, consider it is how often AOS have to call SQL server to perform any type of query. It can be query or it can be insert, update, delete operation. On x-axis here, we show you the number of batches being sold. So like, let's say 100 means that I had to perform scanning 100 times, 100 unique batch numbers for the sales picking, and so forth. By the violet line, you see the execution time of the existing solution based on inventory transactions. And the green line shows you the same scenario, but using the warehouse-specific inventory transactions. So as you can see, charts look really promising. And they are even better for the full license plate move. But please be aware that those charts are built based on data from our dev boxes on demo data. But if we talk about the real customer experience, for full license plate movement, customer report from 3 to 9 times faster execution, and sales picking is around 50% faster on real data, real environments. Let's now talk about the breaking changes. So how does this feature effectively affect your customizations? What do you need to be aware of? And by far the biggest impact is that we don't generate InventTrans and InventTrans origin records anymore. But please note it is only for the warehouse works and containers. What does it mean for you is the following. If you have some forms or reports or queries, any logic which reads and relies on presence of those records, then you need to uptake you need to do some changes in those customizations. This diagram kind of summarizes those changes. So with red, we show the tables which we don't generate anymore records for, right? So no InventTrans records for the works and containers, but also note that there are two very special tables in the warehouse area called WHS work InventTrans and WHS container trans. And those tables are basically like a joining point between the warehouse world and the inventory world. And they have columns called InventTrans ID from and InventTrans ID to. And when the warehouse work or container uses a new stack, the warehouse-specific inventory transactions, then we don't populate those fields anymore. So it means if your customizations expect some data in those fields for query or for whatever reason, you should be aware that they will not be populated anymore. And let's now talk about two very special hierarchies in the inventory stack. One can actually say that those two hierarchies constitute the inventory stack itself. Some of the classes in those hierarchies are intimately related to warehouse works and containers. Like in this case, WHS invent move work and its child classes. Extensions over those classes, then you for sure need to do some changes to those customizations because we will not use those classes anymore once the new warehouse specific inventory transactions are used. But if you have customizations somewhere upper level in the hierarchy, like shown in yellow here, like on invent movement, then we are actually not sure because it really depends on the nature of the customization. It may be that your customization was applicable only for the sales transactions and not affecting the work transactions. Then your customization is actually okay, right? But maybe it needs to be revisited. So yellow, just like warning. But the majority of classes in those hierarchies are actually not affected at all. So all the classes related to sales, purchase, and all other transaction originators, if you have any customizations on them, they will be functioning just fine. So there are no changes to that. And same applies to invent update hierarchy. Certain classes specific to warehouse, like invent UPD financial light. Many classes are reused in warehouse scenarios and non-warehouse scenarios. They are marked in yellow. And certain classes are absolutely have nothing to do with the warehouse, like invent UPD picked. There are also other X++ extensibility changes, there are certain methods which we don't call anymore. And the full list of them you can find in the feature validator. I will describe the feature validator in more details just in a few slides. But just be aware of that some key classes like WHSInvent and WHSWorkExecute put away to location, certain methods there are not called. And let's now talk a little bit about risks, potential risks with activating this feature. So as we explained, the warehouse-specific inventory transactions, they don't carry any financial impact. That's by design. So what we see in the telemetry, it shouldn't actually be any problem for our customers. But if for some reason your customization was expecting that warehouse works or containers have financial impact, then it's worth looking carefully into this scenario. Also, as part of reducing the number of statuses, transaction statuses which we support, we cut off the ordered and unordered transaction statuses because we haven't seen the real need for them and real scenarios for the warehouse space. What does it mean for you is that when peak work line is executed, the on hand won't tell you that some quantity is expected on the next put location. But please note, the system was never actually able to predict that some quantity is expected at the final put location or something like that. Another change to be aware of is the introduction of the warehouse transactions form. We actually introduced it to reduce the number of breaking changes because we didn't want to touch the inventory transactions form, which has tons of customizations which we could break. That's why it's one of the reasons why we introduced new form. But it also means that if you had some customizations on inventory transactions form, which you believe would be useful for the warehouse transactions as well, then most likely you need to move them, copy them one way or the other to the warehouse transactions form as well. As part of working on this feature, we actually took a chance to optimize two processes even more heavily. One of them is WMA inventory movement operation. So on the left, you see how the system functioned before the introduction of the warehouse-specific inventory transactions. So if you moved a license plate, in this example, like license plate with 2 serial numbers, the system would first, it would create each transaction in reserved state, and then it would update it into registered issue or receipt. It would use the user location as well, right? But the interesting point about this process is that it happens in one single DB transaction. So it's actually, all those changes are invisible for the user. End of the day, all user sees is that inventory is moved from FL001 to FL002. So we optimized heavily this process. So one of the changes, we stopped using user location at all in the inventory movement scenario. So we will move directly from source to destination. And we put all those serial numbers in a single item set, and we reuse that item set in both transactions. What does it mean for you is that you completely lose the information that inventory moved through the user location in the inventory movement scenario. But you don't lose that information completely because warehouse work will still say you which worker executed the movement. And something very similar we did with the closed container functionality. So before, when you packed various serial numbers, they were generating unique container trans records. Each of them will create a pair of transaction issue from pack and receive on bay door. So once you activate the warehouse transactions feature, we are performing much smarter. We are grouping serial numbers in a single item set, and we are reusing it whenever possible in single group operations. But it also means that your container trans records may reference the same transaction. So they will have the same origin ID, transaction origin ID. Let's talk about two tools we are introducing, which we hope will help with finding customizations which needs to be updated. First of those tools is feature validator. So it functions as following. Whenever you go to the feature management portal and you try to enable the warehouse-specific inventory transactions feature, the system will automatically scan all your customizations, and it will find all the override or wrap or subscribe extensions over the methods which we consider are broken. I have described them on the previous slides. If it detects something like that, it will not allow you to enable the feature. So the user will get a descriptive error which explains why you cannot enable a feature. On the official documentation, we describe exactly what needs to happen when that happens, but in short, the partner or the developer needs to look in the extensions, and there is a described way how to solve this problem. We also introduce a set of new best practice rules. Basically, they're able to find the same stuff as feature validator does, but also it does something in addition. It can detect access to the deprecated table fields. If you recap, I mentioned that on the WHS work InventTrans and WHS container trans, we don't fill anymore two fields once the feature is used, right? So those BP rules will be able to detect any queries you have which use those fields, and it will throw a warning with exact line number where the problem relies. Important to note that BP rules do not run as part of feature activation in the feature management portal, but you need to run them explicitly, either through the Visual Studio or a command line tool or a cloud build. And I wanted to stress once more what does not change. So we don't change on-hand data structures. So InventSum and WHSInventReserve, they remain absolutely the same. So all your on-hand forms, extensions, location directives, and what's not, they can remain absolutely the same. And we also don't touch source document transactions. All we have described so far applies only to warehouse works and warehouse containers. All your sales transactions, purchase, counting, what's not, remains absolutely the same. Let's look in the release schedule. The feature is in a public preview in 10.32, and it was in private preview in 10.31. With that said, thank you very much. Thanks DynamicsCon for giving this opportunity. It was a pleasure to present to you.